I was sitting at my son's dinner table when my daughter-in-law looked right at him and whispered, "He's too senile to know how much money he has." My own flesh and blood just sat there in silence. The words cut deeper than any knife. After a lifetime of building everything they now enjoy, I was dismissed like a burden at my own family's table. I swallowed my pride that night, but inside, something shifted. They thought I was blind, fading. They had no idea I had already begun keeping records of every move they made. And when I found a document with my signature that I never signed, I knew exactly how this fight would end. So what happened when I finally revealed my secret in front of everyone? You'll want to stay with me until the very end. Tell me in the comments, what city are you watching from tonight? The drive into Vincent and Marla's neighborhood always carried a strange duality. Quiet, tree-lined streets that looked welcoming from the outside. But inside their home, I often felt like a guest in someone else's theater. The early spring chill lingered in the air as I pulled my coat tighter and made my way up the brick walkway. Vincent greeted me with a nod, though his eyes darted past me toward something on his phone. Marla appeared in the doorway, perfect as always. Her voice bright, but her smile sharp. Clara sat at the table already, her young shoulders hunched as though bracing for another evening of tension. Dinner began with the usual pleasantries, though the rhythm felt forced. The aroma of roasted chicken should have been comforting. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. I let my gaze rest on my granddaughter for a moment. Clara barely touched her fork. Then it happened. Marla, glass of wine in hand, looked across at me and quipped lightly, "We must remember to remind Dad about his pills. He's been forgetting lately." A ripple of chuckles followed. The words cut sharper than the knife beside my plate. I forced a polite grin, nodding as though the comment was harmless. But inside, humiliation simmered, excusing myself under the pretense of stretching my legs. I wandered toward the hallway. Voices carried more clearly there, and my steps slowed. Marla's tone dropped low, sharp enough to pierce through the wall. "He's too senile to know how much money he has," she whispered. Vincent didn't protest. His silence stung worse than any insult. The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Years of providing for this family, paying for schools, houses, comforts, and now this. I steadied myself against the wall, inhaling slowly before stepping back into the dining room. My expression betrayed nothing. I took my seat again, smiling faintly as if I had heard nothing at all. As the conversation meandered to vacations and Vincent's work, my mind turned inward. Decades of managing accounts, legal briefs, contracts, they weren't easily forgotten. Age might have slowed the pace of my walk, stiffened my knees, but my mind? It was sharp enough to notice the tremor in Marla's grip when she clasped Vincent's hand, steering the conversation. My son leaned on her more than he realized, or maybe more than he wanted to admit. I chewed deliberately, studying her posture, the way her eyes darted toward me when she thought I wasn't looking. Memories crept in, letters missing from my mail, Vincent suggesting casually that he could take care of the paperwork for me. Marla hovering whenever I sorted through bills. Alone, each moment seemed insignificant. Together, they formed a troubling picture. Across the table, Clara lifted her eyes from her plate and met mine. A concern lingered there, soft but unmistakable. That look anchored me. Whatever storm was brewing, she seemed to sense it too. For the first time in weeks, I felt less isolated in this house of whispered betrayals. Later, under the pretense of getting fresh air, I drifted into Vincent's study. The room smelled faintly of leather and ink. Papers lay scattered on his desk. One folder caught my attention. A sheet inside bore my signature, yet no memory surfaced of signing it. My chest tightened, each heartbeat loud in my ears, fingers trembling. I closed the folder carefully, as if touching it too long might confirm my worst fears. The silence of the study wrapped around me, heavy and suffocating. Leaning closer to the desk, I murmured just loud enough for myself. "If they think I'm senile, they've forgotten who taught them how to fight in court." The narrow brick sidewalks of Beacon Hill were still damp from a late drizzle when I made my way back from the market that evening. Lanterns flickered outside the brownstones, and the gaslight glow painted shadows that seemed to whisper my name. I stopped to adjust the bag of groceries in my hand when Mrs. Carmichael, a neighbor I'd known for decades, leaned across her wrought iron railing. "You know, Jerome," she said lightly. "Marla mentioned the other day that you've been forgetting things more often. We all have to be careful at our age, don't we?" Her voice was casual, almost kind. But the words cut like glass, so Marla's dig at dinner hadn't stayed at the table. It had drifted into the streets, slipped into the chatter of neighbors, who now looked at me with pity. The humiliation was no longer private. It had become gossip. Another brick laid in the wall they were building around me. I nodded politely, forced a chuckle, and kept walking, though inside something sank deep, heavy as stone. Later that night, over a glass of lukewarm water in Vincent's parlor, I decided to test my suspicion. I told him a story, an ordinary one about repairing the old Dodge in the driveway years ago, Clara standing by with a flashlight. I'd told it once before. I repeated it deliberately. Vincent's eyes rolled before the punchline landed. He chuckled in that patronizing way that once belonged only to stubborn teenagers. "Dad, you've already told us that twice, maybe 3 times. The laughter wasn't cruel, but it wasn't loving either. It was the kind that dismissed me, folded me neatly into the role they'd scripted, the doddering old man who couldn't keep his stories straight." Marla smiled thinly from across the room, sipping her wine. The trap had worked. They were weaving a narrative of my decline, and Vincent, my own son, was playing his part without hesitation. That night, when I retreated upstairs to the guest room, something felt off. I reached for the knob, intending to step back into the hallway for another glass of water, but the door wouldn't turn. I tried again. The lock clicked from the outside. My breath caught. They hadn't just laughed at me. They'd locked me in. For several minutes I stood still, listening. The townhouse was quiet. Too quiet. Except for the faint hum of the radiator. A feeling spread through me that was worse than anger. It was the awareness of being caged, of losing not only dignity but freedom. My pulse thudded in my ears. I sat on the edge of the bed, forcing calm. They would not see fear, not yet. The following morning, while Vincent and Marla were busy in the kitchen, I wandered the hall slowly, my hands tucked behind my back like any harmless old man. That's when I noticed it. A tiny red light blinking in the corner of the hallway ceiling. Then another in the study, half hidden behind a plant. Cameras. My movements weren't just mocked. They were recorded, catalogued as evidence to be used against me. I glanced toward Clara's room. She lingered at the doorway, her eyes darting toward the corner light before meeting mine. The look in her gaze was quick, a silent message. She knew. Maybe she couldn't speak, but she hadn't surrendered completely to their plan. For a moment, the cold weight on my chest eased. That night, I didn't pace. I didn't rattle the knob or shout. I sat quietly on the edge of the bed, aware of the unblinking eyes in the corners. Let them watch. Let them think they were writing my story. Slowly, I pulled a small notebook from my pocket, slid it beneath the mattress, and whispered into the silence. If they want to watch me, I'll give them a show they'll never forget. The house creaked, and the cameras blinked their steady rhythm. My first act of resistance was hidden in plain sight, paper and ink resting against the springs of a borrowed bed. The house was quiet, but it was the wrong kind of quiet, the sort that pressed against the walls of my study like a weight. I sat in the old leather chair by the desk, staring at the blank space on the wall where my late wife's portrait had always hung. For years, that picture greeted me every morning with her calm eyes and the faintest trace of a smile. Now it was gone. That absence felt louder than any insult Marla had ever thrown my way. It was more than just a missing photo. It was an attempt to erase her, to scrub away the memory of a woman who had been the heart of this family. My hands tightened on the armrests. The betrayal at dinner had stung. The locked door had unsettled me. The cameras had angered me. But this was personal. Her voice returned in fragments, like whispers carried on spring winds through Beacon Hill. "Jerome," she used to tell me when times were hard, "we don't measure dignity in money. We measure it in how we stand when people try to take it from us." I could almost hear her still, reminding me not to shrink, not to let them win. I closed my eyes and saw the nights I had stayed up drafting case briefs while she sat nearby, her hands trembling but her spirit unbroken. I had worked myself to the bone to send Vincent to law school, to give him a chance at a life where he'd never know hunger or debt. I sold one of the houses in Cape Cod to pay tuition, and I remember telling myself it was worth it, because he was worth it. Later, when my wife fell ill, I didn't hesitate to sell the old Dodge Ram, then a second property. Every penny went to treatments, specialists, anything that promised her another year with us. I sat by her bedside every night, watching her fight. She fought for life, for family, and now I realized her fight wasn't just against illness. It was against the neglect that Vincent and Marla now embodied. The bitterness rose like bile. Everything I had poured into this family, every sacrifice, every hour of sleep I had lost, had become ammunition against me. To Marla, I was a relic to be discarded. To Vincent, I was a burden to be managed. A sharp clatter pulled me back. On the desk, a new set of pill bottles waited, lined up neatly like soldiers. I picked one up, squinting at the label. Dr. Hallie D'Angelo's name glared back at me. I had known him for years, trusted him even, but something about the dosage made my stomach tighten. Twice the strength I had ever needed, twice the fog in my head. No wonder the past weeks had felt like wading through mud. The drowsiness, the slips in memory, the sudden fatigue, it all made sense now. Marla must have had a hand in this. Hallie might be prescribing, but she was the one pulling strings. I set the bottle down slowly, anger simmering beneath the surface. They wanted to build their case, the senile old man who forgot his own name, incapable of managing his estate. They wanted paperwork that said, incompetent. And with that, they'd take everything. I wasn't ready to play the fool. Not yet. Leaning forward, I pulled out a notepad and tested myself. I wrote down every major case I had argued in my prime, the dates of the verdicts, the judges' names. I recited passages of law out loud, then checked them against the books. The clarity was there. The sharpness had not dulled, not when I wasn't under the haze of those pills. A calm determination settled over me. I would not be the story they spun at dinner parties. I would not let them draft me as a helpless man fading into irrelevance. If they wanted proof of my decline, I would give them proof of my endurance. I gathered the pill bottles and slid them into the bottom drawer of the desk, covering them with old files. If anyone came snooping, they'd think I had misplaced them. Later, I would find a way to swap them out, make it look as though I was still taking them. The room smelled faintly of old wood and leather, a comfort I clung to as I whispered into the stillness. They want me to fade away, but I will not vanish so easily. Just then, the floorboards outside the study creaked. My breath caught. Someone was listening. I stared at the closed door, the faint line of shadow beneath it shifting ever so slightly. For a long moment, neither I nor the figure moved. My heartbeat pounded in my ears. The envelope looked ordinary enough, just another piece of evening mail tucked among bills and catalogs. But the name on it wasn't mine. It was Vincent's. Yet the return address bore the name of my bank, the very one that held my retirement account. Something inside tightened. I slipped it beneath my coat before Marla's heels clicked down the hallway. In the quiet of the study, I peeled it open with fingers steadier than I expected. My name stared back at me from the header, tied to numbers I knew by heart. Only these numbers didn't match. Large withdrawals, precise and frequent. The kind only a practiced hand would orchestrate. It wasn't sloppiness, it was strategy. The air in the room thickened. My pulse beat like a drum as I compared the statement with the records I kept tucked in an old ledger at home. Line after line confirmed the same truth. Money had been leaving my account, siphoned off with careful precision. The words Marla had whispered at the dinner table, "He's too senile to know how much money he has," echoed in my head, suddenly sharper, crueler. It hadn't been just mockery. It had been preparation, a cover story for theft. I leaned back in the leather chair, its creak sounding louder than it should in the silence. My eyes drifted toward Vincent's desk, where a folder lay open. Curiosity outweighed caution. I pulled it closer and froze. Pages of legal documents spilled out, each bearing my signature, yet none of them stirred a memory of signing. Not a single stroke of ink felt like mine. At the bottom, the witness line carried the name Harold Buono. A lawyer I once trusted to handle minor disputes had become the notary of my undoing. The betrayal wasn't just Vincent's weak silence or Marla's venom. It had become an alliance, a conspiracy, a complete erasure of everything I had built. The humiliation I'd endured over whispered gossip and locked doors was nothing compared to this theft of my life's work. The sound of footsteps snapped me back. Vincent entered casually, his shirt sleeves rolled up, a beer bottle in hand. I quickly slid the folder shut and tilted my gaze toward a framed family photo on the shelf. He rambled about Clara's schoolwork, never suspecting my clenched jaw or the sweat cooling on my back. I nodded where I had to, lips thin, every part of me screaming to confront him. But I stayed silent. If I lost my temper now, I'd lose everything. Evidence mattered more than anger. When he finally left, the weight of the letter pressed heavy against my chest pocket. It was proof. The first tangible piece. I slipped it deeper into my coat, careful not to bend it. As I turned to leave the study, a shadow filled the doorway. Marla stood there, arms crossed, smile painted just a little too wide. Her eyes swept from my coat to the desk behind me. "Going somewhere, Dad?" she asked, syrup dripping from every word. The hall light glared above her, sharp and unforgiving. For the first time, it felt like she saw through me completely, as if she knew I had glimpsed the machinery behind their act. My fingers brushed the folded letter, a reminder that I was still in the fight, inside. Resolve hardened into steel. They thought they had me cornered, mocked, medicated, locked away. But they had forgotten who I was, the man who once built cases detail by detail, who taught his son how to argue in court, who never lost when the truth was on his side. I stepped forward slowly, keeping my face neutral, almost pleasant. But behind the mask, the war had already begun. The evening settled heavy over the townhouse, the lamps glowing faintly in the living room as Vincent flipped through the channels with distracted fingers. Marla perched at the edge of the sofa, wine glass balanced neatly, her polished smile never faltering. Clara sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded over a magazine she wasn't reading. The room felt staged, like everyone was performing a role for one another. I leaned back into my chair, studying them the way I once studied juries. Every flicker of the eyes, every twitch of the fingers carried meaning. The weight of the letter I had hidden, the memory of signatures I never gave, pressed against my chest. Tonight, I needed to see what they would reveal if nudged just a little. "Tomorrow," I said casually, as though it were no more important than picking up groceries. "I think I'll pay a visit to the bank. Been a while since I checked in on a few things." The air shifted. Marla's polished veneer faltered for less than a heartbeat. Her eyes tightened. Her fingers gripped the stem of her glass just a touch too hard. She recovered swiftly, glancing at Vincent with a smile. "That's wonderful, Jerome," she said brightly. "Though really, at your age, isn't it easier to let Vincent handle all those numbers and papers?" Vincent laughed a little too loudly. "Yeah, Dad, no need to worry yourself. I've got it all under control." Their eagerness betrayed them. The fear was there, sharp and thin like glass underfoot. I masked my own satisfaction, only nodding slowly. Inside, the first victory settled deep, a confirmation that they knew I was closer to the truth than they wanted me to be. Later, when Vincent disappeared upstairs to fetch another stack of bills and Marla busied herself in the kitchen, I called him back into the room. My voice was steady, but the years of sacrifice and betrayal surged behind it. "Vincent," I said, meeting his eyes across the low table. "Son, I built everything you're standing on. Every dollar that's kept this family upright, every hour I worked when you were in school, every sacrifice your mother made, it came from me. Don't ever mistake silence for weakness." For a moment, the television hummed in the background, the only sound in the room. Vincent's smile faltered. He let out a nervous chuckle, scratching at his neck. "Dad, come on. You're taking things too seriously." But before he could smooth it over, Marla cut in, her smile razor-sharp. "Of course, Jerome, we all appreciate your contributions. Let's not dig up the past. Her tone wrapped sugar around steel. The heaviness in the room thickened. Clara shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between us. She knew there was more to this conversation than polite words. It wasn't until later, when the house had grown quieter, that Clara approached me. The others had drifted upstairs, leaving the living room dim. She hesitated in the doorway, clutching something small in her hand. "Grandpa," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Here." She slipped a folded piece of paper into my palm and quickly walked away before anyone could notice. I opened it slowly beneath the muted light of the lamp. The handwriting was quick but clear. "They are planning something with Dr. D'Angelo. Be careful." My chest tightened. Clara's warning burned hotter than any insult or betrayal yet. In that moment, she became the faint thread of hope I'd been clinging to. I tucked the note deep into my pocket, guarding it like treasure. Alone later that night, I sat in the study with the house around me quiet as a tomb. Their betrayal had stretched so far, beyond money, beyond humiliation. Now it reached into my health, my very existence. The anger inside me cooled into something harder, sharper. No longer just a father hurt by his son's betrayal. I had become a strategist again. A man who had once fought cases in courtrooms where everything was at stake. Silence had been my shield, but it was time to sharpen it into a weapon. As I left the room, I caught the faint murmur of Marla's voice drifting down the hallway. I paused just outside the study door. "Yes, Harold," she whispered into the phone, her tone hushed but urgent. "We need that signature before the weekends." Her words sliced through me. The lawyer's name, the pressure in her voice. It confirmed what I had feared. I clenched my jaw so tight it hurt, whispering under my breath, "Not one more page will bear my name without a fight." The old fire that had once carried me through trials long past flickered alive again. If they wanted war, they had chosen the wrong man to underestimate. Marla's voice had that same syrupy tone she used whenever she wanted to mask her real intent. "Dad, it's just a routine checkup," she said, tugging on my coat sleeve as if I were a child. "Doctor, D'Angelo's been so kind to fit you into his schedule." The truth of Clara's note burned in the back of my mind. This was no routine checkup. It was an appointment designed to undermine me, to collect ammunition for the story they were spinning about my decline. Still, I nodded, as if resigned, letting her believe I was compliant. The office smelled of disinfectant and artificial lemon, the kind that never truly masked the sharpness underneath. White walls, sterile lighting, and the low hum of machines. It all gave me the sense of walking into a staged performance. Marla hovered near the door, smiling too broadly at the receptionist. Dr. Hallie D'Angelo entered in a crisp white coat, his glasses gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His handshake was firm, but his eyes cold, sizing me up like an asset to be managed. "Mr. Dahmer," he said, lowering his voice as though speaking to a patient far more frail than I was. "I understand there have been lapses in memory, difficulty keeping track of things?" I forced a small chuckle, leaning on my cane. "Well, we all misplace our keys now and then, don't we?" He glanced at Marla. She nodded solemnly, as though she were confirming a child's mischief. Of course," D'Angelo continued, flipping through his clipboard. "But finances can be tricky at your age. We wouldn't want any confusion to create a problem for your family." His words carried the same rehearsed cadence as a lawyer giving closing arguments. Marla's hand slipped into her purse and drew out a stack of forms. "Dad, these are just standard consent documents," she said lightly. "You know, so the doctor can better manage your care." I leaned forward, squinting at the papers. "So many words for such a simple thing," I muttered, letting my voice trail with weariness. Inside, though, every nerve in my body was alive. Clara had been right. This was their plan. While Marla and the doctor exchanged glances, my fingers brushed the small recorder hidden in my jacket pocket. A gentle click against the lining reassured me it was running. Their voices filled the air, condescending, calculated, damning, and now they were being preserved. I asked questions that seemed naive. What do these signatures mean? Why so many pages? D'Angelo responded with a mix of sighs and oversimplifications, while Marla leaned closer, pressing, "Dad, just trust us. It's all for your benefit." My pulse steadied. Each word they spoke was another nail in the coffin of their scheme. When the appointment ended, I shuffled toward the exit with a slowness that hid my satisfaction. Marla clutched my arm, whispering in faux concern, "You see, Dad?" "We're only looking out for you," I offered a thin smile. "I know, Marla, I know." Outside, the Boston air cut sharp and clean, so different from the stifling office I had just left. Clara's note resurfaced in my memory. Dr. Miriam Bianchi, an independent evaluator, someone untouched by their games. I knew then that I couldn't rely on suspicion alone. Proof would win battles, but an ally would win the war. That night, I sat at my desk, the glow of the banker's lamp casting long shadows across my papers. I played back the recording. Marla's voice was clear, her whisper sharp and venomous. "Once he signs, everything is ours." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the whir of the tape. My hand closed into a fist, knuckles whitening against the oak desk. They thought they were tightening a noose. Instead, they had handed me the rope. I leaned back, whispering into the empty room. Now I have proof. Vincent stopped answering my calls. At first, I thought he was simply busy, the way young men get swept up in work and family obligations. But the longer the silence stretched, the clearer the truth became. His absences weren't accidents. They were calculated. The same son who once called me for advice on contracts and investments now let the phone ring out, leaving me to listen to my own breath in an empty house. Marla, meanwhile, was busier than ever. I caught Edith Kraft, my quiet neighbor from next door, giving me a peculiar glance when I greeted her one afternoon. Later that day, as I walked past the fence line, I overheard two neighbors murmuring, "Marla says Jerome isn't well. She thinks he's slipping." My fists clenched at my sides. What was whispered inside their Beacon Hill townhouse now spilled out into the neighborhood, tainting the air I breathed. Their scheme was moving beyond the confines of family. It was shaping my very reputation. The isolation was deliberate. A man with no allies is easier to dismiss, and I knew that once they succeeded in painting me as confused and unstable, the rest would fall into place. A letter arrived 2 mornings later, delivered by courier. The envelope bore Harold Buono's law office seal. My stomach turned before I even opened it. Inside, the language was carefully dressed in legal politeness. "Dear Mr. Dahmer, this is to confirm our meeting regarding your estate revisions." Revisions I had never requested. The words were arranged to imply my consent, as if I had already agreed to changes. Clara was with me when I read it. Her young hands shook as she took the paper, scanning line after line until her eyes widened. "Grandpa?" she whispered. "They're planning to make this official. They're moving fast." Her fear was confirmation. This was no longer suspicion. It was fact. My name, my estate, my legacy, all wrapped up in a legal net I hadn't woven. I agreed to attend the meeting, outwardly compliant, inwardly calculating. Before leaving home, I slipped the same small recorder Clara had helped me set up into my coat pocket. At Harold's office, the air smelled of polished wood and expensive cigars, a room designed to intimidate. They welcomed me with smiles far too wide. Harold adjusted his tie nervously as Marla leaned forward, her words clipped. Efficient. "Let's just get this signed. Harold, he won't even remember tomorrow." The phrase cut like a knife. I kept my face blank, letting the device on the table quietly collect every syllable. Their arrogance was my shield. They never even noticed. That single sentence, captured in Harold's office, was more than proof. It was the essence of their plot distilled into one damning line. When the papers slid across the table, I didn't so much as lift the pen. My hand rested flat on the polished wood, steady despite the storm inside. "I'll need time to review this," I said calmly, my voice measured. Marla's mask cracked. "Time? What time does he need? He can't even keep track of his medication." Her sharp voice echoed in the room. Vincent shifted uncomfortably. Harold tugged at his collar, the facade unraveling. I met my son's eyes, searching for even a flicker of doubt or remorse. But he looked away. On the way out, I reached for my coat, retrieving the recorder with a practiced movement. Clara, waiting near the door, slipped her hand into mine. Her eyes brimmed with a quiet, fierce loyalty that steadied me. "They think I'm old and blind," I whispered, pressing the device into my pocket. "Let's see who's really senile when this plays in court." For the first time in weeks, I felt a surge of control returning to my veins. Their net was tightening, but so was mine. The invitation came wrapped in false warmth. Marla called it a family meeting, her voice dripping with concern as if she were planning a Sunday supper, but the air in my chest told me otherwise. When I arrived at Vincent and Marla's townhouse that Saturday evening, I could sense the performance waiting to unfold. The lights glared brighter than usual. Chairs had been arranged in a stiff semicircle, and to my quiet surprise, both Edith Kraft and Louis Speck sat among them. Neighbors, summoned as witnesses, or perhaps jurors. My stomach tightened. This wasn't family. It was a courtroom staged in a living room. I kept my face steady, lowering myself into the armchair Marla had reserved for me. Clara slipped in behind me, sitting close enough that her shoulder brushed mine. Her presence was the only honest comfort in that space. Vincent avoided my eyes, fiddling with his cufflinks. I had raised that boy, taught him to stand tall in a room, and now here he was, shrinking into silence at the table his wife controlled. Marla began with syrup. "Dad, we've all noticed how difficult things have been for you lately. Forgetting things, misplacing papers. Tonight is just about making sure you're safe." Her words floated soft, but her eyes were knives. Then came the blow, with a theatrical flourish. She produced a laptop, connecting it to the television. The screen filled with clips, me fumbling for keys, pausing too long before recalling a name, sitting dazed on the porch. Each moment clipped, spliced, and stripped of context, until even I almost believed I was failing. Murmurs stirred from Edith and Louis, soft clucks of pity. "He's too senile to know how much money he has," Marla declared, the venom now naked. She pressed Vincent's hand, prompting him like a puppet. "For his own good, it's time we take responsibility." Heat climbed my neck. Outrage thundered inside me, yet I held the storm. My hands rested steady on my knees, fingers tapping only once against the fabric. The silence stretched until the weight of it pressed back on her. Finally, I spoke, voice low and even. "Is that all?" Her smirk faltered. Just for a second. That was my opening, from my coat pocket. I drew the small recorder Clara and I had carried like a secret flame. My thumb pressed play. Harold Buono's office filled the living room, the voices unmistakable. Marla's, sharp and impatient. "Just have him sign. He won't even remember tomorrow." The words crashed through the air like a gavel. Louis gasped audibly. Edith's lips parted, her hand frozen midair. Clara gripped my arm, her nails digging in with fierce solidarity. I let the silence stretch again. This time, it was theirs to bear. Marla's face drained of color. That's out of context," she stammered. Vincent looked at her, then at me, shame bleeding into his eyes. His mouth opened, but no words came. For once, the puppet had no strings to follow. Louis leaned forward. "Marla, that sounded clear enough to me." Edith nodded, voice shaking. "You've been telling people he isn't well, but that what I just heard," her voice cracked. "That's cruelty." I turned to my son, calm, sharp, deliberate. "Senile, I remember everything that matters. Vincent, every late night I worked to put you through school. Every dime your mother and I sacrificed to keep this family standing. Don't mistake patience for weakness." His eyes dropped to the floor. Marla rose suddenly, her chair screeching against the hardwood. "This isn't over," she snapped. Her polished mask fully cracked. She stormed from the room, heels pounding down the hall. Vincent followed half a step, torn between chasing her and sinking further into shame. The meeting dissolved into uneasy silence. Louis muttered something about needing air. Edith clutched her coat as if escaping smoke, but Clara stayed. Her young hand found mine, warm and certain. When the front door slammed, I leaned close to her, my voice steady as stone. Then neither is my fight. The house was too quiet in the days that followed. I sat in my armchair, listening to the faint creak of the floorboards, the distant hum of traffic along the Boston streets, and the whispers that clung to me like smoke. Word of the confrontation at Vincent and Marla's townhouse had spread fast. Beacon Hill thrived on gossip, and now the whispers carried my name. Neighbors lowered their voices when I passed. Some gave pitying glances, others shifted uneasily, as though standing too close to me might stain their own reputations. I carried myself upright, though inside I felt the bruises of humiliation. Clara was the only one who never faltered. She brought me tea in the evenings, her steady presence reminding me that blood wasn't just shared through veins. It could also be chosen through loyalty. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "You're not alone in this, Grandpa." Her words stitched together the torn fabric of my pride. For the first time in weeks, I believed her. Vincent came to me one evening, long after the lamps along the street had been lit. He didn't call ahead. He simply appeared at my door, shoulders hunched, his tie loosened, eyes shadowed. I opened the door and let him in without a word. He stood in my living room, shifting like a boy caught sneaking into the pantry. "Dad," he started, voice cracking. I'm tired. I'm tired of being pulled in two directions." I said nothing, letting the silence press on him. "She wants everything," he whispered, meaning Marla. "She keeps saying it's for our future, but it's not what I wanted. I didn't marry her to rob you." My chest tightened. For years I had wondered whether my son was a partner in betrayal or merely a pawn. That night, the truth came out. He was weak, yes, but not malicious. Marla's hand was on the wheel. "You're my son," I told him, my voice low and steady. "But don't mistake weakness for loyalty. Silence makes you complicit." His eyes filled with shame, and before he left, he whispered, "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up." The door closed softly behind him, but the weight of his confession lingered. The next day brought sharper threats. A letter arrived by courier. Legal paperwork drafted by Harold Buono, Marla's snake of a lawyer. The words cut deep, motions to challenge my competency, to put me under guardianship. In other words, to strip me of my name and legacy. I laid the papers flat on the table and looked across at Clara, who read them aloud with careful precision. She paled. "They're trying to declare you unfit. They want control of everything." I nodded once, not out of surprise, but out of grim recognition. "Then it's time we make our stand." That afternoon, I met with Louis Speck and Dr. Miriam Bianchi. Louis, once just an acquaintance, leaned forward with fire in his eyes. "They've overplayed their hand. Jerome, I'll testify. I've seen how sharp you are." Dr. Bianchi, calm and professional, promised a full independent evaluation. "I won't be swayed by Marla or D'Angelo. Your record will speak for itself." For the first time in weeks, the path ahead glimmered with possibility, but betrayal has a way of pressing its weight onto every corner of a life. At the corner store, I felt eyes linger too long. Passing conversations stopped when I approached. The humiliation of being labeled senile clung to me. One evening, Edith Kraft, my quiet neighbor who rarely spoke above a murmur, paused beside me as we left the grocer's. She leaned close and whispered, "I heard her. Marla." She was coaching Vincent on what to say. Lies. Jerome, lies meant to paint you as confused. Her voice shook, but her words struck like a hammer. Edith, timid as she was, had become a witness. A small thread of truth pulled from the web Marla had spun. I thanked her quietly, my hand resting on hers for a moment. Another ally had stepped into the light. That night, the hammer fell harder. A summons arrived, stamped with the seal of the courthouse. My name was scrawled across the top, bold and final. A hearing had been scheduled to judge not my wealth, not my property, but my mind. I sat at my desk, reading the lines over and over. Clara hovered nearby, her hands trembling. "What will you do?" she asked. I folded the paper carefully, slid it into my drawer, and let out a slow breath. They want to put me on trial for my own mind, I muttered, the old fire rising in my chest. Let's see who's really sane. The summons sat on the kitchen table all week, a white square of ice. By Friday dawn, the leaves along Tremont had turned the color of rusted pennies, and the air bit like a clean blade. Clara met me at the curb with coffee and mittens she said were non-negotiable. We rode in near silence, the courthouse rising out of the city like a stern old teacher. Reporters weren't here. This wasn't a scandal to the world. Yet the foyer buzzed the way a hive does when smoke drifts in. Neighbors from Beacon Hill pretended they were here for other filings. Eyes followed the cane, the spine, the lines of an old man come to defend the one thing left that can't be titled or seized. His mind. Marla stood near security with Harold Buono, lacquered hair and a half-smile sharp enough to slice paper. Vincent drifted behind them, hands deep in his pockets as though warmth could be found down that far. She looked past me as if at a stain on the floor. Harold's handshake to the clerk was a little too hearty, a performance for anyone watching. Clara touched my sleeve. "Steady," she whispered. The thought settled. This wasn't their stage. This was mine. We were called to a small courtroom with long wooden pews and a ceiling that forced voices up where they thinned into something harmless. The judge, a gray man with careful eyes, took his seat. Formalities, the clerk's oath, the tapping of keys. Harold stood first. He'd brought a binder thick as a church Bible and a voice tuned for sympathy. "Your Honor, we're here because Mr. Dahmer's condition, regrettably, poses risk to his estate and well-being." He slid forward medical printouts, charts, dates, a scatter of numbers that mean little until someone assigns them meaning. Cognitive decline, confusion noted by family, treating physician recommends oversight. Marla rose smoothly when called. She'd chosen a soft sweater and a fragile necklace, a costume designer's idea of dutiful concern. "There have been incidents," she began, layering worry into every syllable. "He repeats stories, misplaces envelopes, forgets appointments. He once left a burner on." She let the room inhale that. "We love him," she said, touching Vincent's arm. "But love has limits in law." Vincent kept staring at the table's grain. 100 little humiliations buzzed the edges of the testimony. Ordinary age repackaged as incompetence. I kept my eyes on the judge's pen. It didn't move much. When Harold rested, he wore the expression of a man already dividing the spoils. Our turn. Clara rose with a folder of our own, the modest kind you buy at a pharmacy. First came Dr. Miriam Bianchi, clear voice, clipped consonants, a presence like unadorned oak. "I evaluated Mr. Dahmer over 2 sessions," she said. "Executive function intact, memory within age norms, financial literacy superior to typical cohort, no clinical basis for guardianship." Harold tried to tug a thread. "Doctor, brief assessments can miss deeper deficits," but she smiled the way a surgeon does when handed a butter knife. These were not brief. Counsel. And I reviewed the medications listed by Dr. Hallie D'Angelo. Dosages were, in my opinion, excessive for an older adult without clear indication. A ripple, she continued. Mr. Dahmer reported increased fogginess corresponding with those prescriptions. Since reducing them cautiously under supervision, his clarity improved. The judge's pen made its first firm note. Louis Speck went next, hat in his lap, shoulders square. "Name's Louis. I've known Jerome 30 years, helped him with home projects, watched Sox with him more seasons than I care to count. I saw Marla press Vincent to get Jerome to sign things while he's in a good mood." Her words didn't sit right. He described the night I was steered to the doctor, the softness of the push that only seems gentle if you've never been pushed before. Harold objected. Hearsay. Impressions. The usual scaffolding. The judge let most of it stand. Then the room shifted. Edith Kraft, who has lived across from Marla long enough to know which blinds stick in summer, stood up with both hands clasped at her middle. I'm not a person who likes to be in rooms like this, she said, but I heard what I heard. She looked at Marla, then at the judge. 2 weeks ago I was taking out recycling late. Window was open. Miss Cunanan said on the phone, and I quote, "Once he signs, everything is ours." She also told someone named Harold, "The cameras are capturing enough." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Harold's face froze between smile and snarl. Marla laughed. Brittle. "She's confused," she said. Edith didn't flinch. "I'm an old woman, not a broken radio." The judge asked a few questions. Times, dates. Edith had them. My heart did the strange old man trick of beating hard without racing. Proof had a voice. It wasn't only mine. When it came time, I walked to the stand without letting the cane set the rhythm. Oath sworn, I sat, folded my hands, and let the years arrange themselves. My name is Jerome Dahmer. I practiced law for 40 years. I keep ledgers. On March 8, 1999, my wife finished her last round of radiation. We celebrated with ginger tea and a grilled cheese she barely touched. On April 2nd this year, my retirement account showed 3 withdrawals in amounts of $9, $1,500 each, spaced to avoid bank alerts. Those are not numbers a senile man would space. I described the letter misdelivered, the forged witness line with Harold's name, the cameras blinking red in corners, the bedroom door that locked on the outside. I described the pills, names, milligrams, the way fog settles behind the eyes and how it lifted once I took back the mornings. Harold tried to interrupt. The judge lifted a palm. I continued, not with fire, but with the clean light of noon. Aging is not incompetence. Forgetting one joke is not losing a life, and a father who is quiet is not a father who is weak. I let silence spread, then added, "My daughter-in-law said I'm too senile to know how much money I have. I know exactly how much I have. I also know how much self-respect costs, and I won't sell it." In the second row, Vincent swallowed hard. For the first time since spring, his eyes met mine and didn't skate away. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Buono," he said, "this court finds insufficient basis for guardianship. Further, given testimony regarding manipulated medication, hidden surveillance, and potential forgery, I am directing the clerk to confer with the district attorney's office regarding a possible criminal inquiry into Ms. Cunanan's conduct and the role of any collaborating parties." Harold's jaw unhinged in stages. Marla's lips formed a perfect O, the kind children draw when they first learn faces. We filed out in the slow, strange quiet that follows a fire being put out, soot everywhere, but the worst heat gone. In the hallway, Marla gripped Vincent's wrist hard enough to blanch it. "If he wins, we lose everything," she hissed, not caring who heard. The words rolled along the wood like dropped coins. I stopped, turned just enough for my voice to carry and not echo. "No," I said, and there was no tremor in it. "You've already lost." She stared as if the world had shifted a half-inch and no longer fit under her heels. Clara let out a breath she'd been storing since April. Louis touched 2 fingers to his hat. Dr. Bianchi gave a nod that felt like a seal on an envelope you've waited your whole life to send. Outside, the wind tasted of iron and winter apples. A flock of starlings twisted over the common like a thought found its shape. We didn't cheer. Old men don't cheer. We keep walking, one sure step, then another, as the next fight lifts its head on the horizon and decides whether to come our way. The house on Beacon Hill felt hollow. Even from the street, the windows glowed dimly, as though the walls themselves were ashamed of what had unfolded inside. Vincent and Marla returned after the hearing without a word, their silence heavier than any outburst. Through Clara's watchful eyes, I learned they barely spoke in the car ride home. Betrayal, I realized, eats at both the guilty and the victim. Inside, the quiet was suffocating. I had lived alone for years since my wife passed, but that loneliness had been honest. This silence in their home was something else, a sharp reminder that lies rot the very foundations of a family. Watching Vincent slump in his chair, his eyes fixed on the floor, I could see the cracks spreading. Marla paced in tight circles, her smile long gone, her hands restless. The victory in court had shifted the ground beneath them, and now they were adrift. A few evenings later, Vincent came to see me. He arrived without Marla, his shoulders rounded, his face older than his years. He lingered in my doorway like a boy waiting for permission. I let him in, offering no words, only a nod toward the chair opposite me. For a long while he said nothing, until his voice broke in a whisper. "I can't defend her anymore, Dad." His hands trembled as he spoke. "I signed things I shouldn't have. She told me it was for your good, for the family. But I knew better. I knew you'd never agree to it. Not like that." Hearing it aloud, confirmation of what I had already uncovered, didn't soothe me. It cut deeper. My son, the boy I once carried on my shoulders through Fenway Park, the young man I paid through law school with nights of exhaustion and sacrifice, had admitted he helped edge me toward ruin. He was no longer just a pawn in Marla's schemes. He was complicit. I wanted to lash out, but age had carved patience into my bones. I let the silence linger before answering. "You nearly lost me, Vincent. Not just the money, not the house, but me. Once trust is broken, it doesn't come back whole." He bowed his head, tears dotting his sleeve. There was no satisfaction in watching him cry, only the weary knowledge that choices leave scars. And those scars live longer than pride. That was the true consequence of betrayal. Marla's fury arrived soon after. I wasn't there when it began, but Clara told me how the shouting rattled the townhouse walls. Marla accused Vincent of weakness, of siding with me. She spat words sharp enough to cut, threatening to leave if he didn't fall back in line. When I finally faced her, her eyes blazed with desperation disguised as rage. "You've poisoned him against me," she snarled. "No," I answered calmly, my voice even. "Truth has a way of poisoning lies all on its own." For the first time, I saw fear behind her anger. She stormed out, slamming the door so hard it shook the pictures on the wall. Vincent collapsed into Clara's arms, sobbing like a man who had finally seen the ruins he'd built with his own hands. I did not gloat, and I offered no comfort. Some lessons a man must learn in the quiet wreckage of his choices. That night, I sat alone, the autumn wind rattling the glass. Revenge had never been about shouting her down in court or watching her rage. It was about standing steady, keeping dignity intact while their lies collapsed around them. True revenge wasn't loud. It was the quiet endurance of a man who refused to be erased. As the days passed, whispers reached me. The district prosecutor was reviewing evidence from the recordings and testimonies. Marla and Harold Buono might soon face charges. It was no longer just a family matter. Justice was stretching its hand into the public sphere. I stood by my window, watching leaves spiral down onto the cobblestones, brittle and bright in the fading light. Time moved slowly, but it moved. "Justice moves slowly," I murmured to myself, voice steady, "but it moves." The thought carried me into the night, not with triumph, but with the quiet certainty that dignity, once defended, becomes its own shield. The chill of early winter clung to the courthouse steps as I walked in, Clara steady at my side. My cane clicked softly against the stone, each sound reminding me I was still standing, still here. The gallery inside buzzed with whispers, faces turned toward me, some curious, others pitying, but I carried myself tall. This was the moment everything had been building toward, and I refused to let them see me falter. The judge's voice filled the courtroom, deliberate and final. Marla sat stiff, her eyes darting like a cornered fox, while Harold Buono avoided my gaze entirely. The ruling came down sharp as a gavel strike, guilty of attempted fraud and manipulation. My estate and name were to be restored, my competency affirmed in writing. And the paper carried more weight than gold. It was proof no one could ever strip me of my dignity again. Relief surged through me, but it wasn't the kind that made you cheer. It was the quiet, bone-deep release of a storm that had battered you for too long. Marla's composure shattered when officers stepped forward. She shrieked, her voice echoing in the chamber as if it could claw its way through stone walls. Vincent tried to hush her, but she tore free, her hands flailing as if she could push away justice itself. For a fleeting second, I almost pitied her, so blinded by greed she couldn't see the cage she'd built for herself. Watching her let out in handcuffs, I didn't gloat, I simply breathed, knowing truth had finally spoken louder than her lies. Then came the revelation that shook even Vincent. Evidence unearthed from Harold's files proved Marla had been siphoning money into secret accounts. That money now flowed back into my estate, like stolen water returning to its well. Clara squeezed my hand as if to say, "It's over." But I knew it wasn't. Betrayal doesn't end with a verdict. It lingers. It scars. After the proceedings, Vincent approached me in the hallway. His shoulders slumped as though the weight of years had finally pressed down on him. His voice cracked when he asked, "Dad, is there any forgiveness left for me?" For a moment, the boy I once held on his first day of school flickered before me, but then came the man who had let silence be consent, who had let his wife use him as a weapon against his own father. "A father forgives," I said quietly, "but a man never forgets." His eyes welled with shame. I told him trust wasn't words, it was deeds. If he wanted to rebuild, he'd have to prove it through every choice he made from here on. I left him standing there, torn between what he had been and what he might still become. In the days that followed, life settled into a rhythm I hadn't felt in years. With Clara's help, I signed new safeguards, ensuring no one, not Marla, not Harold, not even Vincent, could ever tamper with my estate again. Louis Speck came by with his steady handshake, Miriam Bianchi with her clear-eyed reassurance, and Edith Kraft, once silent, now spoke openly in the neighborhood, telling anyone who doubted exactly what she had overheard. Her words rebuilt my standing in the community faster than any court ruling could. One evening, I sat by my fireplace, the logs crackling as the flames warmed the chill from the room. Old family photos lined the mantel, some faces gone, some blurred by time, but each carrying the weight of a life lived. They thought age meant weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. But wisdom, I realized, is sharper than any sword, more enduring than wealth. I turned to Clara and told her the lesson I hoped she'd never forget. Guard your dignity, guard your truth. Wealth fades, but honor sustains. She nodded, her young eyes wide with understanding far beyond her years. As the fire burned low, I leaned back and allowed myself the rarest of gifts, peace. Justice had been served, my legacy preserved, and the family that tried to erase me now faced the ruin of their own choices. My lips curved into a faint smile as I looked at the photos one last time before closing my eyes. This story was no longer about revenge. It was about survival, honor, and the quiet strength of a man who refused to be forgotten.